When Love Speaks, a play in one act, written by Lois Meredith, directed by Pamela Berlin, with Laila Robbins as Marta. Marta's apartment near Columbia University.
He's my first thought in the morning. I shuffle to the window, still half asleep. If I have any luck, maybe I can catch him on an early walk with his yellow lab, Hector. There. A man with a dog way over in the corner there. The dog looks familiar. This is crazy. I'm 11 floors above the Columbia campus trying to estimate the man's height, the length of his legs. What about the baseball cap? Are those his white Nikes? I try to sense the rhythm of his gait. No. That's not the way my guy moves. This would be laughable if it weren't so pathetic. I am not an adolescent girl drowning in hormones, obsessed with the boy next door. I'm a rather accomplished professional woman in her 60s. I'm his clinical supervisor at Columbia. How have I let this happen? Emptiness. That's how. Pain. Something to fill the void. A year and a half of wondering who I was, why I should even want to be alive without Steve. We had been married 30 years when he died. I still ached for him, expected to come home to him. I still wanted to run to the phone to share the infinite and meaningless details of the day's happenings. But Steve wasn't there anymore. And never would be. Classical countertransference. Unbelievable. How many hours do I spend warning students about this, teaching them how not to become emotionally involved with their patients and students, how to be empathic but removed, how to maintain separation and powers of analysis. And yet here am I, hopelessly smitten. Things seemed normal enough in the beginning. Michael was one of 12 students in my postgraduate practicum in clinical psychology. He was older than most of the other students. He'd been an actor, a successful actor, and had decided in his early 40s to pursue a career in psychology. He said that just performing wasn't satisfying enough anymore. He wanted to be able to use his skills as an actor to help real people bridge the gap of loneliness, understand what it felt like to be in another person's skin. Now, he had a lot of catching up to do. He knew it and worked hard. He asked a lot of intelligent questions. He used himself and his knowledge of dramatic literature in an interesting and touching way. He taught us a lot about how to be attentive to the voice, its myriad capacities to evoke feeling, from instilling distrust to creating intimacy. And of course, I couldn't help noticing. He was gorgeous. Out of curiosity about his performance background, I Googled him. He had trained classically in London, done a lot of Shakespeare, several Broadway shows. Just before deciding to become a psychologist, he'd done a one-man show about love and loneliness, containing a number of Shakespeare's sonnets. He called it Love Lost. Before long, I found myself returning over and over again to the YouTube video of his show. What was it that compelled me? The theme? Undoubtedly. Love lost. And what else? The longing. Yes, there was more than grief in Michael's piece. There was a longing for love, and there was something incredible about his voice. The richness, the way its tonality found a home in my body. When he spoke, something in me answered. Life. His voice was bringing me back to life. Our weekly practicum sessions proceeded in a normal way. I was aware of the effect on me of Michael's recorded voice, but in the classroom, even in my office, I was able to remain objective, professional. He was doing good work, showed up at his individual supervision sessions well prepared. But in one of them, he did confess tearfully that he was splitting up with his wife of 10 years. They would be sharing custody of their 2-year-old son, Oliver. Michael had rented himself an apartment near Columbia, just blocks from where I live. I became aware of wanting to hold him, comfort him. And then, one day, out of the blue, a mysterious envelope arrived in the mail, no return sender or address. A beautiful card with the following lines from Shakespeare's Love's Labour's Lost. When love speaks, the voice of all the gods makes heaven drowsy with the harmony. It was signed only Love from a Secret Admirer. When love speaks. Nothing like this had ever happened to me before, not even during my wild dating days. Was I unconsciously flirting or acting needy with my male friends? With my colleagues? Yes, maybe I was spending a bit too much time in conversation with a couple of them. And I had to admit that since Steve died, I had been feeling invisible. Not as a professional, but as a woman. I never imagined this would be my lot. I was used to being noticed. Was I now just another older woman? A widow. In the interest of due diligence, I casually broached the subject with 2 possible suspects. They denied authorship. Could it have been Michael? Face it, I wanted it to have been Michael. He was beautiful, gifted, generous. Did Michael see me in the way that I hoped? I rushed to Google When Love Speaks. Turns out there was an earlier recording of Shakespeare's sonnets called, you guessed it, When Love Speaks. It featured a number of well-known actors and musicians. Was he one of them? Was he giving me this clue? I scrambled down the list of participants. Michael was not one of them. So I went back to the card. There were still many reasons to associate the card with Michael, many giveaways, if you wanted to look for them. For one, we had discussed his one-man show in class, so he knew I knew of the video. Then, all our practicum work on the voice, inspired mostly by him. Yes, when a human voice speaks and conveys love, the gods themselves raise their voices in joy and harmony. And then the play it comes from, Love's Labour's Lost. Michael's piece was called Love Lost. No labors in there. But maybe Michael was suggesting something about our lost labor, our wasted efforts. To do what? To avoid what? Think this qualifies as an obsession? I so wanted to ask him if he had sent it, but I didn't dare. It would have been a breach of professionalism. Instead, I became more and more addicted to his video. I watched his lips sensuously embrace the syllables he was pronouncing. I watched his eyes close in passion. Being your slave, what should I do but tend upon the hours and times of your desire? I I wanted to touch him. Touch him how? What I wanted was, I wanted our naked bodies to touch. I wanted to feel his arms around me. I wanted to give him physical pleasure, man and woman pleasure. I wanted to watch his eyes close, just like when he performs the sonnets, hear his beautiful voice grow hoarse with desire. Oh, God. If Steve was out there someplace in the universe and was aware of my profound physical longing for... Was I being unfaithful to our love? To his memory? Guilt began to invade my lustful fantasies. When the pandemic closed everything down, our practicum group moved to Zoom, our one-on-one supervision as well. I couldn't be close enough to Michael anymore to feel the heat of his body, but there was an intimacy about having his face inches away on my computer screen. He began to share details of his personal life. Okay, I didn't do enough to shut that down, but at least I resisted doing the same. Then the magical thinking started. If I can do 30 push-ups today, I will see him and Hector when I go to Morton Williams to buy groceries. This was getting out of hand. So I made an appointment with Evelyn, my old mentor and former clinical supervisor. She looked much the same on my screen as she always had. Same gray hair in a bun, oversized glasses down on her nose. She seemed mildly amused at my plight. "What is your analysis of what you're doing?" she asked. She had always started our sessions that way. It annoyed the hell out of me. But it did help me focus again on what my rational self knew all too well. That during this period of intense deprivation, desperately missing Steve, and not even knowing anymore who I was without him, I had constructed something for myself to dream on. I had created romance, intrigue, purpose. Grief inspired, I admitted. I am constructing my own reality, a kind of magical realism. Yes, we believe what we want and need to believe. Now, for real realism, if you are no longer his supervisor, she asked me, would you want a relationship with him? Yes. Are you sure? She asked. I thought for a moment. Even if he weren't much younger, we probably couldn't ever have a relationship of equals. He would be starting out with me as the authority figure, Michael as the promising student. Too parental. Even if I didn't feel parental. He would eventually get angry, and then I would. Not good. And yet, when he performs the sonnets, there is no question about his authority. He is the sonnets. When my love swears that she is made of truth, I do believe her, though I know she lies. Or, sweet love, renew thy force. Be it not said thy edge should blunter be than appetite. And my favorite, to me, fair friend, you can never be old, for as you were when first your eye I eyed, such seems your beauty still. I can reproduce his line readings, but not his voice. What is my voice these days? Okay, so I pulled myself together and reinvented myself as his supervisor. I must admit, though, I felt my heart racing as I prepared for our Tuesday morning sessions. And if I'm being honest, I didn't sleep all that well the night before, either. When he asked my advice about personal things, I still felt the need to make life better for him. Caretaking isn't necessarily parental, but was able to channel Evelyn. What do you think you should do in this situation? I would ask. It didn't last long. When he told me at the end of one of our supervision sessions that he felt ready to date and had gone on a dating site, my immediate reaction was one of despair. Wasn't I enough for him? I went back to watching his video. Addictively. His voice. How can I describe this? In truly important things, words fail us. I wanted his voice inside me. It was a carnal thing. Eros, life force. When love speaks. His voice made me happy. What if, despite all my efforts, despite all the shrinky analysis, I had simply fallen in love with him? I took down the several photos of Steve still on the bureau in my bedroom. I finally understood what it felt like to have a split personality. When I was with Michael, still on Zoom after many months, I was the consummate professional. But when left to my own devices, I was another person in another world. And then one day, as I stood in the Sherwin-Williams store gazing at a wall of paint choices for my bathroom, I heard a beautifully familiar voice. I really love Man on the Moon yellow. Used it in my new bathroom. It was, of course, Michael. Want to pop in and take a look? I'm just in the next block. How great, I think. He's creating a new life for himself. He's proud of his efforts. He wants to share that with me. I told him I couldn't make it then, but would drop in for a minute the next afternoon. Evelyn does not wait to hear my analysis. She almost shouts, "Absolutely not!" I should have listened. He opens the door. He's freshly showered, hair slicked back, clean shirt. We're both wearing masks. He motions me to enter. The apartment is small, but quite beautiful. Off-white walls, contemporary furniture, a few objects displayed on countertops. This is a room that has been planned and carefully, even lovingly executed. He asks if I'd like to see the bedroom. Sure, I say. As I move through the doorway, he lingers there, causing our bodies to touch. Probably inadvertent, I think, though I feel suddenly flustered. I make a short tour, looking at photos on the walls of past performances, family members, one of his soon-to-be ex-wife, an admittedly beautiful actress holding infant Oliver. I turn to ask about one of the photos and find him less than a foot away. He looks at me searchingly. Is it time to take off our masks? Literally or figuratively, I say, riffing on our frequent teasing each other about the domain of metaphors. But the question is already moot. His mask is off. I wonder fleetingly if I'm trembling. I meet his gaze and slowly remove my mask. Is this the stupidest thing I have ever allowed to happen? If we get any closer, he could give me COVID. But all I want is to touch him. Stop. Maybe you already have the best of all worlds as his supervisor. You can see him regularly, at least until he finishes his fellowship. Help him and still have your wonderful fantasies. But I want. And what about your own career, my dear? So many hard-working years in the making? This is the Me Too era. Touching a student could cost you your professorship and your license. Stop, you idiot, before it's too late. I'm in his arms. His lips are touching mine. And how sweet it is. The very mouth I tasted in my imagination as I consumed his video, his real-life mouth now delicious as it covers mine. He pulls me close. His body is solid, strong. He steps back to look at me. "Are we sure?" he asks. I feel unmasked in every sense. I'm already naked, open. He sees me. I want him to see me. I've been sure for a long time, I whisper. "Then let's make it beautiful," he says. And we make it beautiful. Later, we lie together on his bed. He turns on his side to look at me. "I waited a long time for this moment," he says softly. "How lucky we are." I try to stay in the present. Isn't that what I tell the people I work with? Peace. Peace and belonging. For these precious seconds, I have found a home with him. I'm about to tell him how happy he has made me, when a shrill beeping— it's my alarm clock. I wake up in my own bed, alone. When was that dream exactly? 6 months ago? Last night? Alexa, Bach, Goldberg Variations, Kimiko Ishizaka, 2012. Music is healing, don't you think? Time certainly is not. It stretches and recoils like a rubber band. No, time hadn't healed much of anything. Michael was a precious distraction. But after that dream, I knew I had to let go. Unsustainable and so dangerous. I tried, but failed miserably at first. I kept creating fantasies that were more and more. Finally, after several months of this, I succeeded in, I don't know, numbing myself. Hardest thing I ever had to do. Emptiness returned. And I went back to grieving. Acutely grieving. For Steve. Yes, that was about 6 months ago. If you had asked me at that moment, I would have said, "Are you kidding me? I would give years of my life to have Steve back. Life isn't life without him." 6 months ago, I'd be saying, "I still get up in the morning and see him sitting on the window seat in our apartment. I imagine him next to me as we look out at the river and sky, listening to the music we love." 6 months ago, I would have said, "I live in the past. I recreate as many of the beautiful scenes of our lives together as I can remember, because I'm terrified of forgetting them. I'm afraid that the pain of his last years will supersede the joy of all the preceding ones." He died of cancer, fighting all the way. What else am I, even now, afraid of forgetting? Is leaning close to me. "You're a pretty girl." Sitting outside our little house in the country under those magnificent trees, listening to them whisper to each other. 6 months ago, I'd be saying, I'm still not ready to get rid of the few things left in his closet. Blazer, chinos, bathrobe, and that plastic drawer full of his little things. Batteries, cords, God knows what. And folders with his writings. I don't read them. I tried. Sort of. I feel guilty about this. Why didn't I ever make a super effort to understand his work? Steve was a world-renowned astrophysicist. God, it was all so abstract, so mathematical. I'm more comfortable in the world of feelings. But he could go there. I reread the cards he gave me over the years. Some overflow with passion. And I did help him write a chapter for that anthology, the point of which was to reduce his concepts to statements simple enough for college freshmen to understand. Black holes for dummies. That's the level at which I understood them. 6 months ago, I would say, thank heavens, at least my professional life continues unremarkably. One of the few things keeping me in present reality. I meet with my students, we discuss cases, I watch their sessions through a two-way mirror. I need to be present to my students' needs, fully immersed in their stories. It keeps me from drowning in mine. Unless I get too involved. Yeah, Michael. I know that my longing for him kept me alive when all I felt was death and loss. I'm using the past tense. He's still in my life, at least until June. I see him every week, and what do I feel? Don't be disingenuous. You know very well what you feel. My friends were sympathetic after Steve died. Some made real efforts to take care of me for a while. Now they've gone back to their own lives. That's as it should be, I try to convince myself. Go online, they told me. That's how everybody does it these days. I couldn't. Life was not life without Steve. I used to feel only pity and disdain for women who talked like that. You can't make your life about a man. What's your life about? Who are you? It's true. So much of my recent life had been about Steve. During the 3 years of his illness, when I was his primary caregiver, I had put everything except my teaching on indefinite hold. Yes. Who was I? Now that he was gone. I still had no answer to that question. I seem to have lost even the part of myself that lived not only with Steve in the good times, but even before that. The person I'm discovering as I clean out my file drawers. All those love letters, my God. The intense passion I seem to have aroused in a number of men. I reread those letters and wonder, who was she? Who was I? And where was Steve? 6 months ago, I would have confessed, yes, I call out to him, I beg him to come back, to be with me. I began to ask myself questions like, why on this particular morning did I choose the Casals CD? When I opened the cover, there was a note from me to him, saved from long ago. I had written, because I love you. Couldn't be just chance that I picked up that CD, could it? Could anything I was doing make it happen? Could I convince the powers? Could I will him back? The recurring bets with Providence. If the walk sign is flashing and I can make it across the street before it changes to stop, Steve will be with me when I have dinner tonight. If I happen to look at the clock at exactly 11:11, he'll watch over me while I'm asleep. And then one Saturday night in September, as I threw back the duvet to get into bed, I heard him say, it was absolutely Steve's voice, "Good night, sweetheart." What? Another grief-inspired construction? I vowed to call Evelyn the next day. But when I walked through the dining room on my way to the kitchen the next morning, Steve was sitting in his customary place on the window seat, in the blue bathrobe I hadn't been able to give away. He smiled. I screamed and ran out of the room. What was that? In the kitchen, I tried to steady myself on the counter. "I thought you wanted me back," he called. "This is not a very warm welcome. Please come see me, or shall I come to you?" Before I could answer, he was standing beside me. Shaking, I reached out very tentatively to touch him. He was real. Flesh, skin, bone. I looked into his eyes. Yes, those deep brown eyes. But how? We cremated you. Your ashes are in my closet. Come here. He put his arms around me and drew me to him. The scent of him. Unmistakable. This was Steve. I don't understand anything, but I've missed you so much. We stood holding each other. He led me back to the dining room and sat me down at our customary places at the table. "We need some music," he said. "Our usual Sunday morning Bach?" He nodded at the sound system, and the Goldberg started to play. I swear, no Alexa. He just nodded. How is this possible? Are you really back? Are you back for good? I managed to ask. "I'll be here as long as you want me. But I'm afraid I'll take a bit of getting used to." "What do you mean?" "Well, depending on a lot of factors. It's really too complicated to explain right now. Sometimes I'll be like this, flesh and blood. Sometimes you'll see me, but I won't have substance. And sometimes you'll hear me, but not even see me. I'll be here, though." I don't understand. You mean sometimes you'll be here, but I won't know it if you're not talking? Something like that. And one more thing. Yes? No one else can perceive me in any way. Not even Marcia and Marilyn? No. So you probably shouldn't even tell them. I was crushed. Our daughters had loved him dearly. It would make them so happy to know you were here, to have you in their life again, to tell you what they're doing. Oh, I know what they're doing. Marcia just passed the bar and Marilyn started a new play, right? Yes, but how? Sweetheart, don't ask questions. That's the only thing I ask of you. I don't know the answers. And even if I did, well, it's about energy, matter and energy. Let's just celebrate. I'm back to keep you company, to take care of you in all the ways you crave. I so wanted to believe this was not delusional. I wanted to believe that when love is strong enough, it prevails. And that's how it started. At first, it was like having an invisible, loving handyman. Changing a light bulb over our dining room table would have required my getting up on our shaky stepladder and balancing the glass shade with one hand while unscrewing and rescrewing light bulbs. Steve mimed doing that while standing next to me. The new bulb was suddenly in place. Putting dishes in the dishwasher? My technique during our married life was to stick things in wherever they'd fit. But Steve, the ultimate practitioner of scientific methodology, would tolerate no mixing of glassware, china, pots, and pans. He would ask me provocatively if I knew the difference. Now, if I placed an object where it didn't belong, he'd put his hand on the dishwasher rack, wink at me affectionately, and presto, the dishwasher became as organized as his lab. We both giggled. I told Steve that for a long time I had imagined him in bed with me at night. Not your imagination, he answered. I've been there for quite a while. What I didn't have the courage to tell him then was that I longed to lie naked with him, to feel him. Did I dare reach over and initiate that kind of touch? Not yet. Not yet. Items suddenly began to appear on my shopping list, snow peas in particular, his favorite snack. And if I bought them, he consumed them. I almost got used to watching food disappear from his plate, whether or not I could see him. Weird as hell, but I was just so happy to have him back. When Zoom failed just before an important student conference, he got it up and running, just in time. I couldn't see him, but felt him sitting with me at the computer. Are we going to see handsome Michael with the voice of an angel? I almost died. He was aware, then, of my obsession. Had he been there all along as I plotted? Fantasized? Could he have entered my dream world? Oh, God! I don't need him. I have you now, was all I could think of to say. Suddenly, Steve was visible. He rolled his eyes. After that, I was ultra-professional in my Zoom mentoring sessions with Michael. No personal questions. He noticed the difference. Is everything okay, Dr. Cooper? But I wasn't alone anymore. I had someone to talk to, and how we talked. We talked about our girls, our friends. We talked about my work. We talked about the world. He invited me to share my many anxieties, the election, the climate, the rise of conspiracy theories and belief systems that belonged in the Middle Ages. Did what I was experiencing also belong in the Middle Ages? I didn't dare go down that path. We talked about black holes. Steve was able to explain them to me in a way I finally understood. Sort of. We got excited about Elon Musk's SpaceX initiative, about the discovery of new galaxies, and water on the moon. And, as always, I questioned him about my own astrological obsession. What is outside of the universe? But here, as always, his answer failed to satisfy me. In all our conversations, he was as brilliant, as funny as he'd always been. What he didn't seem to want to talk about was the parallel universe he now inhabited. What was it like to be dead? Did he have contact with others who had died? Where did he go when he wasn't with me? When I asked him about any of this, he got a sad faraway look. I didn't want to cause him pain, so I stopped asking. He had me call our girls so he could listen in on their answers to questions he prompted me to ask. It made me uncomfortable since I usually responded to what they wanted to talk about. Marilyn, our playwright daughter, was aware of the change. "Mother, what's going on with you? You sound kind of, I don't know, manic or something." Steve thought this was very funny. I now had company on my long walks. Since COVID, they were both my release and my nourishment. When Steve was physically present, we would walk hand in hand. It never occurred to me that other people would see my outstretched arm, but not what I was connected to. We started through the 400 or so CDs I'd brought back to New York from our house upstate. Steve wasn't happy that they were still, after nearly 2 years, in the same plastic bins in the front closet. He insisted that we take them all out and start organizing them alphabetically. I didn't have the time or the desire to do this. I was still working full-time with students on Zoom. Steve said he'd take care of it and began to construct some shelves in the study that had belonged to him. This room that had become my study since his departure, my peaceful though lonely place of work and meditation, became a construction site. But he did unearth some treasures. We started listening again to old favorites. Steve had always loved James Taylor, Carole King, Joan Baez. He had even played the guitar and sung with friends. Now we sat in the fading light of October evenings, letting the music fill us together. Being with friends, though, became tricky. If I couldn't see Steve, I never knew if he was there or not. Sometimes I knew he was there because he would speak to me. They couldn't hear him, of course, and he would comment on what I or the other person was saying. Sometimes I could see him. That was even worse, since I kept forgetting that no one else could. I kept feeling I should answer him, and they noticed. "What's going on with you, Marta? You seem a bit, I don't know, distracted." I didn't know whether Steve could control when he was with me. I didn't understand why he was sometimes present in flesh and blood, then suddenly ghostly. It seemed clear that he was in control sometimes, other times not at all. I got up the nerve to ask him. He looked stricken. "I would like to be with you all the time. It's an act of will. Sometimes I'm just not strong enough." I took his hand, unmistakably Steve's hand. I kissed it. I cried. After all, I had my love back again. Well, if I'm being honest, not quite. Steve's brilliant mind was there, his seemingly endless fountain of knowledge about things, his critical thinking. The vulnerable part of him, though, the part I had most loved, the Steve that would have cried with me, seemed absent. Was that intentional or beyond his control? Would it change over time? I didn't want to say anything that sounded like complaining. Steve had been back for a couple of weeks before I got up the nerve to talk about physical intimacy. I had thought about it, of course, wanted it, wondered about whether or not it was possible. I began to fantasize in more and more detail about how it might be. It would depend on what form whether he could, you know. We had taken to cuddling a bit, particularly on weekend mornings when I didn't have to jump out of bed to prepare for work. And I didn't have to initiate things either. He did. These were the times I most treasured. It felt real. I could almost forget that he was... I can't even bring myself to say that word. One Saturday morning, I went for it. You used to desire me. Do you still? Of course, he responded. I watch you dressing and undressing. I want to kiss every inch of you. I feel the same. I've missed that part of us so much. Could we? I was afraid you wouldn't want me like this, he answered, almost as if he had just been released from a crushing vice. We began to make love, our unique love-making ritual, crafted over the years. Slow at first, even maddeningly so. Kissing, caressing, hands, mouths, then those private wells of pleasure. Passion eclipsing control. Now, just as it came time for our two bodies, our two souls to become fleetingly one, he was gone. Steve? No answer. Steve? Where are you? Are you still here somewhere? Nothing. He was gone. Utterly and completely gone. I cried myself to sleep. When I awoke in the morning, his side of the bed had not been slept in. I ran to the dining room. The window seat? No Steve. I was beside myself. And then I heard him. His voice was very faint, as if coming from a great distance. I'm making my way back. That's what I thought I heard. Just go about your life. But where are you? What happened? It took almost a week. I heard his voice faintly from time to time, but couldn't see, let alone feel him. And then one morning, there he was, waiting for me on the window seat. He was completely back. You've got to tell me what's going on, I said. This is so fucked up. I can't fully explain it. He was angry now. Has to do with energy. Some things require more than others. I have been given only a certain amount to deal with. Given? By whom? Bad choice of words. Okay, remember how we used to talk about Einstein? Matter and energy, E equals mc squared? In life, I was mostly matter. Now I'm mostly energy, but it's a finite amount. Turning back to matter is very costly. It uses some of the total energy. But isn't there something about energy can neither be created nor destroyed? He softened. And I thought you weren't listening to me all those years. I was listening, just not understanding. Remember how you used to tell your students that loving someone and also letting yourself be totally given over to that person physically was an intimacy so scary that a lot of people couldn't let themselves do it? Yes? Turns out there's a parallel in quantum physics. Being both body and spirit also costs a lot of energy. What does that mean? It means we will have to make decisions and plans. I love you. I want to make love to you, but it looks like I may not be able to without paying the price of periods of absence. Total absence? You won't be here at all, and then you'll suddenly be back? I don't know. This is the first time I've done this. We both laughed. We tried it. We would have a night of beautiful pleasure, and then he would be gone. Just as my life was beginning to feel complete, I had to deal with the grief of losing him again. If I'm honest with myself, I realized that there was also something different about our lovemaking. How can I describe this? All of the physical acts were there. The musical score was being followed scrupulously, but Steve's interpretation seemed different. There seemed to be less feeling on his part, less soul. Was this again about matter and energy? I was afraid to ask him again. Once I got over the unmitigated joy of having him back, I also had to admit that I was having trouble planning my life. I never knew how long it would take him to come back after one of our intimate encounters, and I have shame about this. I never knew when I could plan on enjoying the relative quiet of my own space, the relief of seeing our girls or my friends without him. I began to realize that in the almost 2 years since he'd been gone, I'd created a new life. I found myself getting irritated. I would come into my study to prepare for a Zoom call with students and find total disarray. Closet emptied onto my study floor, journals stacked on my desk, and now Steve had decided to arrange all my books alphabetically. They were in piles everywhere. He hadn't even asked me if that's what I wanted. "Please, Steve," I would call out. "I need this space now." Sometimes he would appear and order was reestablished in a flash, but sometimes not. I would hear his voice far, far away, and a bit dismissive. "I can't get there right now. Sorry." The same unpredictability about scheduling. Steve and I would make a plan to spend an evening together. I'd turn down invitations to see friends or to have supper with someone at an outside restaurant, or I'd prepare his favorite meal, broiled salmon with garlic and parsley, ready a James Taylor CD. I'd wait for hours. No Steve. No word. And sometimes he'd make an unexpected and not particularly welcome appearance, like the evening friends invited me to a very casual COVID dinner party. I was sitting on the couch, masked, 6 feet from one of their guests, a psychiatrist. I was being social, asking him questions about his family, his work. Suddenly Steve was sitting between us, commenting negatively on everything the man said. "This guy doesn't know what he's talking about. He has no emotional intelligence," etc., etc. I excused myself, went into the bathroom with Steve, and begged him to back off. He returned to the couch with me, continued to sit between us, but at least he stopped his ranting. I tried as gently as I could to hide my frustration, but wasn't very good at it. "Steve, can you please try to be more considerate of my needs, of my schedule?" "Are you fucking kidding me? Do you have any idea what it's like for me? I'm defying the laws of physics to try to be with you." After that, he stopped asking me altogether how I felt about things. And instead of sweetly planning for when he thought he'd be able to come back, he would say things like, "I want you to be ready in 10 days. Don't tell me you have class or mentoring sessions," as if he were talking to a stubborn child. Was he suffering in a way I couldn't know? Did he really have no choice himself about when he could appear? Was it simply that he didn't want to risk missing our time together? His softness, his tenderness began to disappear altogether. He seemed angry all the time, even in bed. This was a Steve I had never known before. Well, I had. Isn't it strange how when a loved one dies, we make ourselves forget what we don't want to remember? We tell ourselves that everything about them, with them, was perfect. This new life with Steve was becoming like another wave of the unhappiness I had felt at times during our marriage. Not infrequently, I had scrambled to prepare a lovely meal. The girls and I would wait for him. He would be late. I would call him, home in an hour. We would wait again. I would finally let the girls have their supper. It was often 11 p.m. before he walked through the door. We fought. I cried. He stormed off to his study. How many times had we planned to devote a weekend day to each other, to walk in the woods, listen to music, make love? There was always a paper to be finished, a talk to prepare. And, if I admit it, much of the time Steve was in his head even when his body was present. He would seem to be listening to me, the kids, family, friends, but his attention was somewhere else, in the ethers. A particular look in his eyes. I recognized it right away. It was too familiar. He wasn't with us. With me. We had even seen a therapist together several different times. In fact, things would get better for a while. I think I can face it now. As much as I had loved him, made him the center of my universe, his first love had always been his work. Now I realized why I hadn't tried harder to understand his work. It was my competition, and it always won. I hated it. Why hadn't I put my foot down? What would that have even looked like? Was I afraid of being alone? With Steve back, intermittently, we still had wonderful times, when we weren't bickering. We continued to take our walks and occasionally even dance to the music of the guys who play in Riverside Park. But I began to feel lonely, even when he was around. Relationships are a balancing act, aren't they? What we're willing to give up or what we get. The scales seemed weighted differently now. I found myself spending more time than I had to on my Zoom calls with Michael. Totally professional, of course. Despite his rigorous dating, he hadn't found anyone yet that he could love. I stopped wanting to make love with Steve altogether. It had become mechanical. Sex was just a meeting of bodies now. Lustful sometimes, but without that extraordinary meeting of what is most profound in us. The loss felt greater than the pleasure. "You're not enjoying this, are you?" he asked during one of our encounters. I started to cry. "I can't find you. I can't feel you." There was desperation in his eyes. I thought he was going to yell at me, but he turned away, locked in. He said nothing. think that was it for me. There was no high drama, no inciting incident, as the screenwriters would say. We just stopped. His visits became farther and farther apart. When we were together, we fought about everything. I was as bad as he was. And one day, after a typical outburst on my part, I heard myself saying, "It's nobody's fault. We've both tried. But I can't go on like this. I need to be me. I think we should stop trying." I said that. He was suddenly very quiet, and then softly, with the first real emotion he'd shown in weeks. "It's painful for me, too." We looked at each other for a long moment. I couldn't bring myself to speak. I nodded, ever so slightly. I had said what I needed to say. We held each other. Was this the last time I would ever see him? Feel his breath on my hair? I had just said I was ready to let him go forever, but found myself hanging on for dear life. He had been my life. It was my life now. I felt him growing cooler in my arms. I felt the energy of him draining, the substance of him fading. And then he was gone. That was 2 months ago. This is his robe. Still smells like him. Time to give it away. I can't. Not yet. I'll hang it in the front closet. But I have given all the construction stuff to my super and ordered a revolving CD stand from Hammacher Schlemmer. I listened to James Taylor singing Sweet Baby James and remember all that was sweet about our years together. The sweetness is back. I've registered for a class in quantum mechanics. It will be full of 20-year-old geeks, but I don't care. I still need to know what's outside of the universe. I'm determined. I've finally taken off my wedding ring. I'll give it to whichever the girls decides to get married first. Oh, boy. And then there's Michael. He's still my student. But he won't be forever. I'm enjoying watching him again from my window as he walks Hector. Almost every morning. Not out of desperation now. More like, why is it not okay for a woman to be with someone 20 years younger? Men do it all the time. Anyway, I'm now on a dating site. Will love speak?